Hi guys, Goffy here and welcome back to the channel. In today's video I want to talk about this. This is the Leica M10 and at this point I have now owned this camera 6 months. I thought it was a good kind of checkpoint for me to let you guys know how I'm feeling about the camera and also share some of the images that I've taken over the last 6 months. And this is coming from the perspective of somebody that documents their life and does travel photography rather than the more typical street photography, so maybe I'll offer a slightly different perspective to some of the other videos you'll see here on YouTube. So let's get cracking because it is freezing today. So first up then, why did I pick the Leica M10 over all of the cheaper alternatives out there? And for me, it's got a lot to do with this little thing on the front, the rangefinder. I knew coming into this already that I was going to love the rangefinder because I'd shot with the M240 for I think 4 or 5 years and I currently own an M6 as well. So I knew I was going to like that rangefinder experience and that's the main reason that got me this camera in the first place. Now for me personally, having that kind of optical view of the world means I think I take better photos because I'm taking pictures based on what my eyes see rather than what the camera is kind of converting and showing me on a screen. I don't know what it is, but when I'm shooting with an EVF, I find that I'll shoot wide open far more often and I'll change what I was initially planning to shoot based on what I'm seeing on the screen, rather than just going on my gut feel at the time. And I think because of that optical experience, I end up taking less, and I think about it less in terms of the actual settings and more about capturing the moment that I'm actually in. So for me, the rangefinder was one of the big appeals, and 6 months later is still one of the big appeals. So another thing that I've been really enjoying with this camera over the last 6 months is the files that come out of here. The RAW files in particular, not so much the JPEGs, but the RAW files by default come with a little bit of warmth added. And that little bit of warmth is something that I have a very strong preference for. I really like a little warmth in my images. If you don't, then maybe you wouldn't like these files so much, but these are definitely the best RAW files I've ever played with. I find editing these Leica files from the M10 far more easy to do and kind of match my style than any of the other cameras I've shot, like my Fujis and even previous Leicas. It's also one of the things that's putting me off upgrading from this camera to the M11, because when I tested out the M11, the files from that camera were actually a little bit cold and swayed a little bit towards magenta, whereas these are a little bit warm and sway towards green. The next thing then, and I've said this more than once, has got to be the design and build of this camera. When you're buying these cameras, you are buying into a little bit of a design philosophy and maybe a little bit of a way of life in terms of how you're going to be taking your photos. These cameras give you basically everything you need and nothing more. And for my kind of photography, like this whole documenting my life and travel photography, that's all I need. I can definitely see how for some people this camera would be very, very far away from their requirements, but for me it's pretty much spot on. One of the features I don't like about this camera has got to be this ISO dial. I thought I wouldn't like it, and turns out, yeah, I don't like it. I hate that you have to lift it up first to use it. It feels like that's something where they've gone for the design over the function, whereas most other things on this camera tend to be function first, design second. But the build of this camera definitely makes me want to pick it up, and it definitely makes me pick this camera up over some of my other cameras, even if some of my other cameras might suit my needs a little bit more. Just the feel of this camera makes me want to use it, and if you've got a camera that makes you want to use it, then I think you're onto a winner. So for me personally then, one of the biggest wins with this camera, and over the last 6 months, it's really kind of stood out just how good it is in this field, is its size. Normally in the photography world, if you want good images, that normally means big cameras. The bigger the camera, the bigger the lenses, the better the quality. And this is kind of one of the only cameras I can think of that goes against that. You take no image quality compromise here by packing small. Even on today's trip here, I've got my Leica M10 with me and my Fuji X-H2S, and the Fuji has taken up 3/4 of my billing and bag, and this camera is just slotted, standing up in the side. It takes next to no space at all, and it is a full frame camera, which means this camera ends up coming to places that most of my other cameras just wouldn't go, maybe other than the X100V. That's the other camera that I pretty much took everywhere. Next up then, let's talk lenses, because over the last 6 months, that's one of the things that's changed most for me. I've gone from a collection of Voigtlander lenses through to a collection of Leica lenses, and could I in good faith recommend that somebody else does the same? I'm not really sure. Now with my 50mm Nocturne and my 50mm Summilux, I think I could tell the difference when you shot them wide open, because the Voigtlander was quite busy when it came to the bokeh, whereas the Leica's a lot smoother. But when you slot these lenses down, I couldn't consistently tell you which one was which. The big difference for me though comes into how these lenses feel to use, very similar to the cameras, because I don't know what it is with third-party lens manufacturers for M mounts, but they seem to just make the weirdest lens designs. Optically they're great, but then companies like Voigtlander will just not put finger tabs on their lenses, or they'll have some really weird barrel design, which ends up being the thing that I think differentiates the Leica lenses from the other lenses the most. It all ends up being design rather than optical performance. So could I in good faith recommend that you upgrade? Probably not. They're pretty hard to recommend that you spend that much money, but I definitely don't look back at it and wish I hadn't done it. I'm glad I bought some Leica lenses, and they're bound to hold their value pretty well going forwards as well. So that's enough of the things that I really like then. What about some of the things that have disappointed me? Now, by far, the biggest one for me has got to be battery life. I own 2 batteries for this camera, and on more than one occasion, on a full day's shoot, I've gone through both of those batteries and been left wanting more. Now, both my previous camera to this, the M240, and the newer M11, both have exceptional battery life. This one is just so bad. It's probably the worst camera I've used. And it might be easy just to be like, well, buy a 3rd battery then, but by the time you've got 3 batteries, the charging then becomes a bit of a nightmare. You shoot all day, you're in the hotel in the evening. What do you now need? 3 chargers to be able to charge those batteries quickly? And there's no easy way of being able to charge this camera on the go either. So battery life is definitely the biggest thing that lets me down with this camera. And it's just a shame that it's such a backward step from the previous model. The next dislike for me has got to be the fact that the auto exposure of the M10 is a little bit naff. And it's the same as the previous camera as well. The previous camera, the M240, was exactly the same. The camera definitely has a tendency to blow highlights without really caring. And it's something that you can counter a little bit in a couple ways. One of the ways I've found is setting the exposure compensation to -2/3 of a stop. Downside to this means that all of the correctly exposed images are now all a little bit dark, so sometimes the JPEGs can come out looking a bit naff, but it's not too bad if you know you're going to edit the images anyway. The other way of doing this is the fact that the camera is a little bit different depending on how you have it set up. When you turn the LCD on, it does actually meter off the sensor, and therefore it can sometimes be a little bit more accurate. I found though still then, if I know if I'm in a difficult lighting situation, I'll end up using the rear LCD to expose for it, which is a bit of a shame because the rangefinder was the main thing that I liked about the camera, and not being able to use the rangefinder in difficult situations can be a little bit annoying. So the last 2 things I want to talk about in terms of kind of dislikes of using this camera are specifically to my needs, and that's that kind of documenting my life and travel photography. Now, the first one of these has to do with the fact that the close focusing distance is 70 centimeters. Now, that's a rangefinder limitation, not so much a lens limitation, but it just so happens that most lenses are also built to that same 70 centimeter distance. And knowing that I've got thousands of pounds worth of camera in my bag, but I have to whip out my iPhone, does sometimes annoy me. And I can remember when I was doing my X100V review, my Fuji review, that was one of the things I liked, the fact that it had that kind of macro capability. Now, my girlfriend over the last kind of year has got very good at using this camera, so she's now easily able to take pictures of me, which is great because that's something in the past that I definitely lacked when I was using my M240. It's definitely an advantage of other cameras for what I want to do. Things like the Leica Q and the X100V are an awful lot easier for that sort of thing. So I think that's 2 of the downsides that are kind of pretty specific to me. 70 centimeter isn't going to cause a problem with somebody doing street photography, and also not being able to hand the camera to other people is a pretty niche problem of my own. So there we have it then, 6 months in with this camera, and to be honest with you guys, I absolutely love it. I love shooting with this camera, and it's definitely a camera that kind of revitalized my love for photography during last year. Kind of middle of last year, I started to struggle a little bit to get motivated to take more photos, and picking this camera up has definitely helped. It also ended up meaning that I made more videos for the channel as well, which is always a good thing. And I think if you've got a camera that inspires you to go out and shoot, no matter what it is, then you're definitely onto a winner. Now, over the last 6 months, some of the photos that I've been showing you throughout this video have been some of my favourites that I've ever taken. I've been really enjoying the outputs, not just the experience, which in the past with my M240, I often found I enjoyed the experience, but not so much the outputs, whereas this is definitely that happy medium. I did think about upgrading to the M11, and that still definitely plays on my mind a little bit, but I mentioned it earlier, the colours that come out of this camera is currently one of the things that's stopping me. I think what I might do instead is actually consider adding the Leica Q or Q2 back to the channel, because that fills up some of the gaps that this camera leaves. But I've been really enjoying this camera over the last 6 months, and if you've got any questions about anything you've seen in this video, then make sure you hit me up down in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like and subscribe. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers!